Hello and welcome to the Skylanders Spyro's Adventure Developer Commentary. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to one of the writers, Alec Sokolow. Yeah, you're a writer for Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, so what elements of the game did you write?
That's an easy question. So for many years, I had a writing partner, Joel Cohen, and we kind of established our brand in the Hollywood system with Toy Story, but then also with the Garfield movies and Cheaper by the Dozen, and like we kind of got became known as both like family entertainment writers and also kind of because of Toy Story, like just the ability to have toys come to life and give them an inner life and everything. And so we were brought on to Skylanders about, I would say about maybe 11 months before the first game came out. And, we were brought on specifically because Activision and Toys for Bob knew they were sitting on something really dynamic in the gameplay, in the engine, in the technology, in the radio frequency chips, and in the potential for what the game experience was going to be, and they were a little bit stuck in trying to figure out how to kind of put a skin over it and how to create a story that would both sustain not just one game but hopefully launch a whole new kind of franchise of a universe and everything, but then also just specifically, they were under the gun because just to talk about the video game. This is my first time working in the video game industry. In the case of Skylanders, unlike a typical video game that might get rolled out, a AAA video game, console based. Where you want to have a lot of bells and whistles, you want to have a lot of Easter eggs, you want to have a lot of like a very satisfying gameplay experience that you might not get, on phones or on more portable devices. Skylanders, there was also this other conversation about toys and if you will, of these figurines, and a big part of the aspiration was to not only exist in the video game world, but also potentially bring these characters into every player's home and give them personality and give them kind of a certain like bio and a certain sense of magnificence and stuff. And so when they came to me and Joel, it was really like, well, our first meeting, they took us into an office at Activision in Santa Monica, and they sat us down and they showed us some of the gameplay. Some of the, they were still building and figuring it out. And they were like, look, we know we're sitting on like a brilliant novel, but we only have like 65 pages of the novel written, and they're not consecutive. And we don't know what it is yet, but we know we need to kind of make this whole thing kind of cogent and make this whole thing kind of feel like it's organic. So Joel and I were actually brought in, not so much to like, help from within, but almost to be a set of eyes from the outside saying, well, what is this? How will a player consume not just the game, but the entire mythology and have a satisfying experience? How do we bring emotions and bring, clarity to something that was obviously, brilliant in its conceit, technologically and potentially even in the game playing, and so really our role initially wasn't so much to like really write the game as much as it was to work hand in hand with Toys for Bob as they were building the various levels of gameplay to kind of make everything cohesive, and then also to create this bigger kind of meta mythology of how Skylanders really exists for every player. And so it was really, it was a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of like 10,000 yard stares of like, what is this? And for every typical player, they're going to write their own story with this. And so how do we kind of allow every player to be part of the storytelling because of the figurines you only play the game by activating a figurine. And that meant kind of bringing the mythology of the gameplay even out of like the video game itself and bringing it into our physical world. So really, like we were like the meta thinkers maybe, and then there were some other things, which is they didn't have character names for a lot of the characters. They had Spyro from previous game, but then we started to kind of be part of the process of naming the characters. They didn't have a force of evil when we first came on. They didn't have Kaos. One of the first big conversations that we were having is saying like, look, we need to have a fun but potentially threatening figure that you can look at and point at and say, well, that's the bad guy. That's the force that's working against Skylanders and all of Skylands. And so Joel and I kind of worked. That's kind of like how we were first brought in. And after what seemed like forever, and especially probably for Activision because they were paying us by the week, we kind of stumbled on a way of kind of looking at the Skylanders not as toys or as figurines that you might buy in a store, but as frozen superheroes from another dimension. And once that aha moment happened, all of a sudden we had this unifying principle of how to meld our world and the game player's world with Skylands and with the world within the game. And so really, like, I would say, in general, that was our biggest contribution, a huge contribution to the overall experience. But as far as the actual gameplay, Toys for Bob really, the designers, the visual designers of the figurines and the Skylanders and the actual leveling up on the gameplay, that was not really what we were being tasked to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. The kind of responsibility you had. So, did you actually see the levels and the concept art and whatnot, and did that help inspire?
Absolutely, and again, one of the other things, and this is like, I don't know if this is too inside baseball, but when Activision committed to releasing Skylanders, they had a release date of that first game, and there was a lot of pressure to hit that date with the entire product line, which meant working with the toy company and the toy construction, which meant working with the marketers, which meant kind of all of these other things that go just beyond the basic game that they also were under pressure to finish and didn't really know what it was when we were brought on. And so there was a lot of inclusion. There were a lot of meetings with different people that they would say, you're going to meet with the toy developers, you're going to meet with the marketing people, you're going to meet. And then there was this other part, which I think I fully respect, is they also were really, really sensitive to not wanting any information to get out into the world. And so, for the Comic-Con that preceded the release of that first game, they didn't want Skylanders mentioned. They didn't want Skylanders to have any presence. It's so opposite how like movies try and market themselves, where it's like, we want to create a buzz, we want to create a marketplace. And here it was almost like they were very sensitive and aware that if the wrong narrative began, it would hurt the chance for the game to succeed. So it was really like, yes, very inclusive, but also kind of top secret, to the point in which even when the game was being released and dropping, they sent Joel and me to London and to Paris and then to New York in like 4 days, just to kind of meet with local press and mothers to basically say, look, this is a good, safe video game for your kids to play. It's a magnificent mythology. It has collisions and conflicts, but it doesn't have violence that hopefully is upsetting. And so yeah, we were. I think at that moment in time, we were very essential. We were a missing piece for them. Um, and then, like a lot of things, when you do kind of start to connect the dots, and when you're dealing with mythology and stuff, and you can kind of create this kind of like umbrella mythology, not just of the game, but of the entire experience. Um, then Joel and I kind of become a little bit redundant because like everybody else is just like killing it, doing their job, and we're like the happy idiots saying, "Well, what if there was an explosion 10,000 years ago and it froze, and everybody's like, that's great, but now we got to actually have the rubber hit the road."
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You said that like you came up with Chaos. Was there any concept art of any kind for Chaos or any sort of villain, or did you just like, oh, we've got a cart with on, here it is?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, and this is like my memory might not be as acute as the Toys for Bob guys on this. I don't think they had a bad guy. I think they had a bad episode. They had this idea of these elements within Skylands, and they had this idea of a core of light that was going to explode and shoot different elements to different aspects of Skylands. But they didn't have who was exploding it and why it was exploding, and really all of that. So I'm saying this like as I'm thinking it. I think they did have Glumshanks, like visually. I don't recall if they had Chaos visually. They may have had some concept drawings. They may not. I just know they didn't have a bad guy in the game, so probably not.
Ah, interesting. Do you find that when writing, there's sort of like a symbiotic nature between writing and the design? Like, did seeing all the concept art and the level design impact how you wrote things? That's all.
Absolutely, and then also what they had was like these not really Venn diagrams, but they had these very large boards of the different characters that existed in the different elements of Skylands, and so you got to really see an earth element or a water element character, and you would see how they were kind of creating them, but visually. But you would also, from my point of view, it really helped because instead of having to think of, initially it was going to be 32 characters, and instead of trying to think, well, how do 32 characters all fit in one mythology? It was really helpful to be able to say, well, really, there's like 4 characters per element, and so really we're just talking about 8 pieces. So it became a little simpler then. But yeah, I mean, you go into the rooms, and this happens in animation movies, and this happens a lot. Is visuals. Nothing is as strong as visuals, and I'm saying this as a writer. Is that when you see a character, you can begin to impart some anthropomorphic emotions. You can begin to build a mythology. Joel and I, when the work that I think we really prided ourselves on. Has to do with creating emotional inner lives for characters. It's kind of the work of a writer to make a character emotionally accessible. So we spent a lot of time staring at all of those characters. At one point, they actually had us write like little, heroic poems about all 32 characters, little eight-line poems that really were their bios, if you will, as a way. And they were flirting with putting that in the actual game, and as like these little Easter eggs that you can go and see this, there's just a little celebration of the character to let the player know a little bit of fun of who the character was. So we were spending a lot of time on that, and a lot of time on just understanding that like a big difference between the writing I usually do and the writing for a video game like Skylanders is that most of the time writing is closed narrative, meaning that you tell one story and you make one decision of which character to tell a story through, or which characters, and you're asking and inviting the consumer and the viewer in to that experience, and either they like it or they don't, but you have complete control of the plumbing, if you will, of logic and of mythology in video games, and especially in a game like Skylanders that is a universe. Every single player is going to play it differently. Every single player could play with one character, or play with all 32, or play, in any which way. And so it's an open narrative. And so the role of a writer is not to give answers as much as it's to like kind of pose interesting, fun questions that might all line up eventually. But it was really a new experience for me, because it was like part and parcel of it was just knowing everybody was going to play a different game. Everybody was going to write their own story.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to hear about the differences between writing for film and now for games. Which do you have a preference on which one you like to work on now?
Well, yeah, that's a I think there's only two kinds of writers. There's like working writers and non-working writers, and so I enjoy working, and I enjoy the challenges of that. I would say I prefer features and films, because that's kind of what I not only grew up living inside of, but I am very comfortable and have put in enough time with the logic of all of that, the decisions I will make as a writer. But it's hard not to love video games for the sheer power of the conversation you can have with the player, and the fun. I actually think all of life is kind of gameplay, and so the fun of living in the logic of leveling up, and what's the new powers, and what's the new forces of antagonism and stuff. And so I'm going to give you like a non-answer answer on that, because it's not about one or the other. It's just like acknowledging that like parallel lines meet in infinity. Like it's that, like, they're just different, but they both offer a lot. And the real, true, so I don't want to sound like a cliche, but the true blessing for me is to just be part of a conversation that might bring some joy to people.
Yeah, that's amazing. What inspired you to become a writer?
God, another simple question. I could probably write a novel on that. I grew up in New York City. I grew up with parents that were in the arts, in a home that culture, whether it was TV or films or even initial video games. My mom in the 1970s had a pretty big job at Warner Brothers on the feature side, and Warner Brothers at that time was involved with Atari. So I grew up in a home where it was not unusual to get a prototype of like one of the first Atari consoles and get a chance to play it, and then get a chance to like talk about movies and see a lot of theater, and the expectation in a fun way was kind of like whatever is happening is what you want to know about. And so it was a very cool conversation growing up. I don't know what drew me to writing in the entertainment industry, other than I wanted to jump on the screen as a kid. I wanted to live in the worlds I was seeing. And then as I was going through school and all of my schooling, I realized along the way, and I didn't realize it soon, that I was not a great test taker, but writing was really fun for me. And anytime I got to write something, I got a better grade. So like I very quickly realized, well, I should do that. But I didn't really know I was going to become a professional writer till after I had graduated university. I kind of graduated and was like, all right, what now? And then I was like, oh, you know what? I want to write movies. And then my folks were kind and supportive enough to say, okay, well, go for it, but why don't you also try and get into law school?
Well, I think I speak for the people watching when I say we're very glad you became a writer, because what you've done for Skylanders is absolutely incredible. And I'm a massive fan of the series, obviously.
Yeah. And by the way, what's really funny is like, so when that game came out, my son was probably around 10, maybe 11 years old. And I never had more fun playing a game than playing that game with my son. And so again, like the gift of what that game, I know what that game means emotionally because I got to watch it through his eyes, and then watch it through my eyes and his eyes. And so, thank you. I have no idea why the gods smiled on me and Joel and said, "Come and play in the sandbox." But it was pretty fun that they did.
Back to Skylanders. Did you expect it to become as big as it did?
This is God. I hope this doesn't sound like ego in a bad way, but I still now, but especially in that period of time, I expected everything that I did with Joel to become big. Like in my mind, I really saw what we did, and the experience of not only Toy Story, but like all the other movies it's almost like you got to see what works with an audience. And so the wisdom you kind of get along the way is understanding like how important it is to tell stories to a hero's perspective. The real thing with Buzz Lightyear that was profound, which I promise you, nobody in that movie was thinking about, was how much the fantasy of flying was going to hit young children, And so the whole Buzz thing about flying or falling with style, but really flying, and the miracle of breaking that physical dimension was so profound watching an audience. And so by the time you get to Skylanders, you realize like the hero's story, the hero's narrative, what we were really trying to do, at least what Joel and I saw as one of our tasks, was like, we want to activate the hero in every player. We want every player to feel more heroic for playing this game. And so, yeah, we expected it to be big because we knew that like that's the secret juice of everything. So like we do that. Who doesn't want to do that? I also think you also never know. So like it's like, you're like, oh, well, we thought that was a good idea.
Yeah.
And again, I would say the real brave guys were the Toys for Bob guys, and then the Activision team for really like seeing what this could be, and then spending the money to make it realized, to give it a chance to be successful.
Yeah. At the time of being brought on to work on the game, were you aware of how popular Spyro as a franchise was?
A little bit, but Spyro had been kind of sitting dormant, and so Spyro, like this really famous character from a game that at that point was about 10 or 15 years old. And so, one of the things in like show business is you always want to like have an above the title star, somebody that like can draw the audience in. And at that moment, that was Spyro. It was just like Spyro's a star, and yet then in the logic of the game, Spyro is no more important than the other characters in actually playing the game, but he's the star. And so. Absolutely, and that to me, that's the stars aligned, and I'm not trying to like be cheeky with like heavens metaphors and stuff, but the universe was really smiling on that game. It's just a lot of things happened. The leaps were taken, and then it turned out magnificent.
Going back to Kaos, was he always intended to be a funny character, or did he start out as a more serious villain?
No, it's two things, and he was always intended to be funny and comic relief. It was in his name. I don't know if in the UK the 1960s sitcom Get Smart is popular or was ever played, but that was at the time, relatively successful, very funny show, really good lineage. Mel Brooks created it, and in that show, which was very cheeky, and it was during the Cold War, and it was like the West versus the East. The force of evil was called Kaos, and when we were sitting around saying we need a bad guy, we wanted to have a user-friendly, kind of cheeky, kind of feels like Saturday morning cartoon bad guy, not scare anybody, but also create a real sense of threat. And so we stumbled on the name almost like, hey, we're paying homage to this old TV show, and even the spelling and everything. And But then there was this other conversation, which is quite practical, which is that the threat within Skylands has to feel real, and the threat for the Skylanders has to feel real. So we had we were kind of, it's almost like just the logic game, but we were like, how do you make him actually dangerous while also being kind of funny? And so even in the creation of him, where he's kind of like some Darth Vader-ish thing, but he's like a mushroom cap, is like, it makes him kind of user-friendly. But in the game, he actually wielded great power. And so, we couldn't take that for granted, that he had to actually be a real threat.
With the characters, were there any other characters who ended up being scrapped or replaced?
Oh, golly. I'd have to look at my notes. I mean, the conversation was so liquid, and they knew they wanted 32 characters for the math of it all, and they knew they were developing the toys and the figurines, and so a lot of decisions were being locked in. But then I actually think when the first game came out, they didn't really push all 32 characters because they were not as confident of certain characters hitting the marketplace as others. What did happen was names changed a lot, and then the bios of the characters would change a lot. One of the places where I think Joel and I were also very helpful was in that area of they could send us off, and in a day or so, we come back with a whole bunch of new bios and names, and just be like, "What about this? What about this? What about this?" So I don't know if characters were scrapped as much as it was there was this sense of trying to just find the most fun and most also kind of user-friendly version of the figurines that were being designed.
Do you have a favorite Skylander?
I kind of liked Stealth Elf. I liked the mythology that we were writing in the forest, but not really. Not really. It's to me, this is something I kind of learned a long time ago as a writer, is that I don't allow myself to get too emotionally attached to any characters I try and create, because I know that they might get changed in the process, and I want to try and always kind of hover above those emotions. I'm gonna politely say any character that I found myself playing with my son I was happy to play with that character.
Yeah, that's fair. You said you wrote the character bios. Did you write the story scrolls for the game as well?
They had us do a bunch of that stuff. We were because in the game, I'm not going to remember at this moment the terminology, but you have these little movies, these little 30-second movies that you can kind of pop into, or that the game would naturally pop into. And so we were writing those things, but they were also being rewritten a lot. And I think that there was a sense, at least I had it, that what we were trying to do was offer a sense of narrative, but that wasn't really what we were being tasked to do. So yeah, they believe me, and I'm going to go back to this. They were paying us by the week, so we were on the clock. So they, quote unquote, owned us, and anything they asked us to do, we were going to take a shot at doing. And there were so many different things going on at the same time that, depending on the day, they would be like, look at this stuff, look at this stuff. We want to have your imprimatur on this, or you can give us a shot. But we weren't the last set of hands to go through that stuff. So I'm not going to say that we wrote it. It was more like we were part of a collective and collaborative conversation.
Is there any behind the scenes story that you think people would love to hear?
I mean, I'll tell a story about myself. It might not be worth it might not be worth anything to anybody. But as I said, Activision flew us to London, and what's the big toy store right near Mayfair? Is it Hanley's?
Oh, Oh, I don't know. I'm from a tiny island outside of the UK.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well. All right. So they fly us to London, and two things happen. All right. It was actually, you know, not gonna lie, it's really nice to like be treated that way. But just as that was happening, Joel and I were in conversations with Zynga to do something with Farmville, and something not video games, something like more narrative. And Zynga was in its silent period because they were going public as a company, so nobody wanted to talk about anything. And because of Skylanders, we were being asked to give interviews, and we got asked, "What else are you doing?" And I made some like cheeky line about, can't really say anything, but something at Zynga and Old McDonald had a farm and whatever, right? And then I get on the plane, and then flying on the plane and land and see that I created some kind of shitstorm where all of a sudden there's all of this like viral stuff about Zynga and Farmville and whatever. And it kind of freaked me out because I had never had that experience where it's like, oh my God. And I'm having to talk to like the Zynga people, and I'm having to talk to my agents. And I'm like, look, I didn't think I did anything that bad. But I say that because I had a night before the appearance at this toy store, and I have a good buddy in London, and he picks me up, and I'm a little freaked out. I'm like, I can't believe this happened. And one thing leads to another. And I'm on LA time, which is like 9 hours.
yeah,
That's right.
it's hard traveling.
He keeps me up and out and enjoying a nice lubrication until about 3 or 4 in the morning, and a London time. And then I have to be at this toy store at 9 in the morning, which is really 1 in the morning or midnight my body time. And so I am like completely turned around. I am like still probably a little bit inebriated. And next thing you know, I'm at this toy store talking to all these moms and all these kids and having to like put this like, safe face on what the product is, what Skylanders is. And all I want to do is like fall over. And Joel, in one of his like probably funnier moments for himself, just let me talk. Because he was just like, dude, it's all yours. And so for me, that was like, I think about that. I think that was kind of insane because it was rather irresponsible, but it was fun. As far as the actual, the writing experience, I'll tell you what I really loved, and I think this really speaks probably more to you and your audience is, the guys that work in this world. They are real believers. They really love these games. They really love these characters. And there was a guy, I don't remember his name, that worked at Activision, but at one point as the figurines were being kind of created and made physical, he built in his office this entire diorama of Skylands, of where all these characters would live. And that was just so cool to me because it was like, wow, like this is what you do in your off time? Like you don't have enough things to think about. You're actually trying to create the right home for all these characters. So stuff like that really penetrated me because it reminded me that we're all like these big kids and that the whole point is to play and have fun. So yeah, I mean that kind of stuff. One of the other things which is literal and this speaks to how much talent was around the creation of this game is the project manager or one of the project managers at Activision was an actual rocket scientist, a guy who had kind of come through and had PhDs in like that kind of, I don't even know what your degree is for that, but he left Activision soon thereafter and became like one of the, driving forces behind Oculus. And so I think that, and by the way, the nicest guy, the most playful guy, a guy that would run marathons and then post about it. And then the guy that seemed that he didn't sleep. And so one of the things for me was just like, wow, like he's an actual rocket scientist, like a lot of talent here. So I don't know if that's an anecdote, but I just would say it was really, it just was kind of fun, and then just also at the same time, you know, for me, I really wanted everybody, I wanted to earn my keep, and I wanted everybody to like feel like not only they got something out of me and Joel, but like that we actually help move the needle for everybody. So it's hard to necessarily be too goofy when you're in the middle of all that stuff.
Well, thank you so much for talking about the game and your experiences. It's been an absolute pleasure. One final question: what advice do you have for aspiring writers?
You know, what I would say for you, for anybody, and inspiring. I'm still an inspiring writer. Every time I sit down to write, I'm hoping it goes well. I would say, you know, writers write, and you learn by doing. And we're living in this like amazing like period where there's so many more platforms to get ideas out, but then there's a paradox because with all of that, there's much less attention for any one idea. And so I would say, you know, believe in what you write, but write it and then write it again and then write it again. And that the real thing with writing for me is it's really storytelling, and that, you know, nobody's born with storytelling skills. You kind of acquire them in your lifetime, and yet there are absolute laws of storytelling that, you know, you could read Joseph Campbell and see about his hero's journey, that he kind of consolidated those thoughts in the 1930s and 40s, and that became like the basis of Star Wars. And so it's like, you know, realize that you don't have to invent the wheel. What you have to do as a writer is write, figure out how you create, figure out your process, and ultimately grow a philosophy and grow a sensibility, but know that it's not going to happen by itself. And so, and know that success is not necessarily going to be about, you know, the physical world. Success is going to be knowing internally that you're doing something that is worthwhile, because there's a lot of other things that you could do other than write. So, you know, if you're going to try and tell stories, you know that you have a good story to tell. That would be my my dime store advice.
Well, thank you very much. As I said before, it's been an absolute pleasure having you join the series, and yeah, I just want to thank you.
Absolutely, and you know, if I could be helpful to you as a sounding board for anything, now that we're connected, just reach out. Like, don't stand on principle. I rather enjoy the asymmetry of the world at this point, and really think that it's really cool to like get to meet anybody that is doing something, and you're doing something. So thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, share the video around. I also have a Twitch, a Twitter, and a Patreon if you would like to support me and the channel. As you can probably tell, this is a massive passion project of mine that I've been working on for quite some time, and I'm really glad that I'm able to get it out to you, and I'm really grateful for you watching the video. If you want to see more from the series or other stuff that I do on this channel, click that notification bell to be notified when I upload next. But thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.